Our new truck is here. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the next episode of Flip That Truck. And we've got our next contestant here on the bench. This showed up today. Finally getting a chance to look at it, kind of go through the parts, saw some pretty limited pictures, and we've got a lot to discover in this truck. Now, if you're not familiar with what this series is, it started with me buying a fairly inexpensive truck, trying to take it, flip it, by upgrading either some standard parts, making some simple fixes, cleaning things up, finding builds that have potential for more money in them, obviously, and then trying to work my way up until the end of this series where I'll find a vehicle that I think would fit nicely in with the rest of my collection. But this is the second truck in this first season of this series, at least. Now, this vehicle I found for sale in the classified sections of the Axial RC Rock Crawlers Facebook group. On there, this truck was listed for $400. Now, I looked at the limited pictures that I could see, kind of took a gauge of it, and I didn't feel that it was worth that. So I made an offer of $325, and I was firm on that. I definitely wasn't going to go any higher, specifically from the images that I could see of the vehicle. If there was maybe some better details or some more information, then possibly I would have been able to adjust my number. But I think that the poor quality images may have been reflection of what we got here. So let's go over that. For the vehicle we started with an SCX-10-1 or original, however you want to call it. This time we did pick up an SCX-10-2 based vehicle. So we've got the Axial AR44 axles underneath of this. Now it looks like these axles were based on one of the original kit versions, as it's got the aluminum links. It also has the 3-piece axles, so this should have the machined ring gear and pinion gear in there with the separate locker. It has the universal shafts in there rather than dog bones, which is a big bonus. Like I said, it's got aluminum links all the way around. The transmission is not the kit version of the Axial SCX-10-2 transmission. It's a standard 3-gear style, and it's the silver case. So this one should have the metal gears inside of that transmission case. At least that's what I was told. Now, the other point of this is that it is an SCX-10-2 chassis, but it does have some custom tube work done. Now, it's got a metal truggy chassis on the back, not a true truggy. The word truggy is a mix between truck and buggy. And what a true truggy is when they take the frame rails and they're cut off at the back of the cab of the vehicle, and then it's all tube work behind it. So if you hear someone say, well, it's not a true truggy, that's what they mean. They mean it still has frame rails behind the back of the cab and then tube work over that, which is what we have here. Now this one also has the tube work carries down into some metal sliders, and then it has these protection bars that go up along the sides of the front fenders, continuing into a big front, brush guard, bull bar, bumper, stinger combination. So that's kind of what we have. It goes all the way around. It's well used. It's, the paint or powder coat that was on here is really chipped off. It seems like it's powder coat. It's pretty heavy on there, but it could just be paint. I'm not 100% sure. The cage in general is okay. It's not a great quality cage. It's just okay. The style is okay for most things, except for this rear thing. Stingers on the rear of vehicles like this are there's nothing I hate more. This is something that you rarely see in at least high quality builds for off-road stuff. And this piece will never stay on this vehicle. Whether I owned it or whether I owned it and was going to sell it, this has got to go because this is awful. So we're going to be doing some cage modifications for sure. There's a couple of joints on the cage that I feel need to be fixed or filled. They're just kind of a weak weld. It's just here on one side and it's empty and open all the way around the back side. There's probably maybe a few other little modifications that I'll do. And then there's just some weld joints that need to be cleaned up. They're just overly big. They need to be ground down. In general, just a lot of hand work that needs to be done to try and make this tube work acceptable, or make it to the level that I think that it has the possibility of being just with the base that we have. And I think by doing that and changing the look and getting rid of some of these styling cues that are what I would consider very unstylish, then I think that we have the ability to make this look even better. And then from there, what I'd also like to do is add some, filler panels, things like that, try and make it look a little bit more polished and finished, and just overall give it a look that is more conducive to something that I think you would see on a little bit higher end full-size build rather than what I think that we have here. Now, as far as running gear goes, as I mentioned, we've got SCX 10.2 axles and they're pretty much stock, I feel. We do have some Pro-Line Hyrax tires, which is a nice bonus, and those are mounted on some SSD steel wheels. They're a gray painted steel wheel. They've got scale hardware around the outside, but like most of the SSD wheels like this, some of the scale hardware has fallen out and has been replaced by some standard socket head hardware. Not too many of them, but here and there we've got a few. So the body is held on with a couple of body posts on the front is all. There was no body clips in it when I got it, so it just lifts off like you see here. Now the body itself is beat up, it's scratched, it's trimmed for this cage. The windows are painted, which is a bummer. It was hard to tell in the pictures. It kind of looked like it, but it is what it is. So I don't think that I'll replace the body because bodies are actually pretty expensive, and that is something that will really eat into the resale cost. So I'll probably do what I can to clean this body up, get rid of some of these stickers that are on it, and just try and make this thing look as good as possible. Underneath, we've got a very dirty, but overall not a bad setup. We've got the stock SCX 10.2 battery tray as well as the chassis mounted servo. We've got regular SCX 10.2 shock towers front and rear. So the shock towers are not integrated into the tube work at all. They're still a standalone part. Now, as far as electronics go, we do have an upgraded servo. This is just a standard 20 kilogram Power HD, I believe, or Power HD. I've seen those servos before. I've had versions like it. You see these servos rebranded under multiple different names. They're a fine servo. They do okay. They'll get the job done. They're a lot better than the ready to run servo, so they're gonna do just fine. Next to it though, we do have a Hobbywing 1080 ESC, which is a nice bonus. I do have a programming card for this so we can make sure that this thing is performing as good as possible. And then mounted to that SCX 10.2 transmission, that one-piece gray style housing, we have an axial sealed can motor. That will probably rip out and I'll upgrade to another one of those Holmes sealed can Crawlmaster motors. Those motors are such a nice upgrade for the cost that it makes a lot of sense to throw one of those things in there. It'll give us just so much of a smoother startup and more power for 20 bucks. It's just a good deal and definitely something that is gonna help this. Another big thing to this truck is that it's used, it's dirty, and if I was to guess, I'd say that this belongs to a smoker at one point. It just has that smell. I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure. Maybe it's something else, but either way, this truck needs a deep cleaning. In the back of the truggy portion, we do have it's like one of those gift card boxes. You used to see them at Home Depot or things like that. It's been cut out a bunch by what looks like some sort of beaver. It was just, it's mangled. I don't know what it was cut with, but it looked like it was very, very dull. I think that this thing has to go. I think that I'll probably try and come up with something that is fit for this, feels a little better, maybe looks like it belongs more so than these little toolboxes. It's also just zip tied in place, so something else again that I'd like to up the quality of. For shocks on this, we've got some TRX4 takeoff shocks, which are good shocks, and I think that those are actually a nice little upgrade. However, one of the shock shafts at least is severely bent. Like if you push this thing down, when you lift it up, you can lift the whole truck off and it still stays up there. You have to really give it a put. You can visually see the hook in that shaft, so no good. So we're gonna definitely have to replace that shock shaft. While I'm at it, I'm definitely gonna take off all of the shocks on here, give them a good go through, probably try and replace the seals, replace the fluids, and see if there's any other ones that need attention as bad as that one. Suspension overall seems like it'll probably move all right. Once I kind of get past the bent part of that rear shaft, everything moves around pretty well. This wheelbase has been extended on this. Obviously, stock SCX-10 wheelbase is 12.3. This thing sits at 13 and a quarter, which I do like personally. I like a lot of my trucks run a longer wheelbase, 13 and a quarter, 13 and a half. That's right around where my Carnivore sits. That really can improve how a truck climbs, can shoot up ledges really well. You know, you do have to deal with maybe a little bit difference of belly clearance, but if you learn how to drive it, it can really be a powerful thing to have that extra wheelbase. We do have a non-matching spare tire on this truck. Probably not something I'm going to try and remedy, just, you know, trying to buy an extra set of tires and then trying to find a wheel or something like that. Probably not something I'm going to worry about too much at this point. Right now it's a RC four-wheel drive IROC, or this could be, actually this is a take-off Red Cat wheel and tire. So it is a bead lock, it is technically functional, but you know, that's about the extent of what that's good for. So I think what my goal is going to be for tonight is I'm gonna actually just strip this vehicle down to parts. Probably won't get into the axles or things like that. I'll probably take the links off, leave those together, you know, and we'll just get things taken apart. That way I can take them, get parts cleaned up, give them a good, you know, either rinsing, washing, whatever it's gonna take to make sure that this vehicle loses this funk that it has. And then I need to get the chassis completely stripped down so that I can repair the welds that I think needed to be touched up beforehand, cut off that rear section, and just start, you know, working some of these welds in so that they look a little bit better. I'm not going to try and go through and change the style of this. It's just, I don't think that that's the goal. If I was going to try and do that, I would build one from scratch. So we're going to work with what we have here. And I think once we get rid of this diving board on the back of this truggy chassis, we'll be closer in line with where I would really, in the end, want to be. This truck did not ship with a receiver. This is just a, you know, bind and drive, I guess is that, well, kind of bind and drive. You have to add your own receiver to this truck. Not sure if I'll add my own or if where we'll be at the end of this is going to be more conducive to a buyer who has their own radio system. I think we're gonna be able to clean this thing up pretty decently. So I don't suspect that we'll be in a low dollar situation by the time this is over. I could see this truck in the end being a good candidate to trade off for another one, or possibly again selling it off and then buying a new one like we did here. Now the last vehicle I sold for $400. It sold fairly quickly. I had listed it on Axial RC Rock Crawlers again, I believe. It was a pretty quick sale. I had found this vehicle before I actually had sold the last one, just finalized the deal afterwards. But with the last vehicle, like I said, we purchased it for $175. By the time I was all said and done with everything, I believe I had spent $230 on that previous vehicle with upgrading the motor, the servo, and the cost for shipping. Like I said, this vehicle we bought for $320, so we didn't spend everything that we made from the last one, which gives us a little bit of money to play around with. So either way, we're sitting in this vehicle at a pretty decent spot. Either way, we need to stay in the black on every one of these to make this series a success. You know, of course, probably not always going to be able to happen, but I think that this one's got enough here to make it a good build when it's done. So let's strip this truck down and we'll see if we find anything else while we're at it. So the teardown is done. We've got the chassis down to just the bare metal, or bare minimum, I guess. The chassis is welded to the frame rails, except at the sliders where it actually bolts on there. So a little bit different. Not sure why, if they were gonna weld it front and rear, they didn't just weld the sliders on as well. But that didn't happen. So I definitely need to get this thing stripped down. I may just take this to a sandblaster and see if I can have someone just get this stripped down for me, just all the way, quick and dirty. That way I don't have to deal with it myself. So I just noticed that it is not welded in the rear. It is bolted together in the rear. However, it is welded in the front. So it's it's only welded here. Everywhere else can float. That's an odd decision, and there's, based on like some paint marks on here, it looks like this thing was painted, basically assembled at one point. Not with the shock towers that I had on there at least, but it was definitely painted with shock towers on it in the past. You can just tell when some things have been, you can see the line of paint where the shock towers were and then got pulled off. Odd decisions that some people make. We still have something here that we're going to be able to turn into a decent looking truck in the end. A lot of this stuff comes down to that last 10% of the build. The truck probably functioned pretty well when everything was in decent condition. Obviously, that completely toasted right rear shock was going to severely hinder the performance of this truck, and I have no idea how that wasn't noticed. That either was noticed and just wasn't stated, or I don't know how you wouldn't notice it driving though. You could see how bad that shock shaft was bent. So beyond that though, the performance probably isn't going to change a ton, because basically we're just going to get things mounted in here in a nice proper way. We're going to do our wiring cleanly so that we didn't have that big ball of zip tied electronics sitting there. We'll try and build some things to make things look proper. Having an upgraded servo, a decent ESC, we'll throw in a decent motor. We'll make sure that the drivetrain is spinning smoothly, make sure that there's no bearing issues or anything like that. The SCX-10-2 axles are gonna perform pretty well. I also just noticed that this thing still has front D-rings on it, and I could easily get those removed as well. I think what we'll find is that once this truck is properly cleaned up and put together well, we'll end up with a really decent looking vehicle. Something that's definitely going to be worth more than what we paid for it. But another big part of selling these things is just properly showing everything, giving all of the specifications, decent pictures, really showing people what's there. I was guessing based on what I was looking at, and I was just throwing a price out there because of it. The last owner of this vehicle could have cleaned this thing up and definitely got another $100 out of it easily with only the parts that were here. But the one last thing we need to do on this vehicle before the end of this video is score it. If you remember in the very first episode, we went through and we scored the vehicle that we got based on several categories that I've kind of predetermined and trying to throw a little bit of background at to give you guys an idea of how or why I'm scoring them the way I am. Now in the last truck, I didn't do an updated score on video. I did update it on my website, which is harleydesigns.com, and I've got a whole section specifically on the Flip That Truck series. So you can go there, see the previous vehicle that we had, then shortly you'll be able to see this vehicle as well as the specifications that we had to start with, and we'll kind of go from there. So the first category is quality. It mainly means the quality of the parts that are used and the condition that they're in. So for quality, I think we're gonna give this one a 7. The last truck had a 6 for quality at the initial build, and it was kind of because it had basic RTR electronics, but it was complete, at least as far as it had a radio, but it was SCX-10-1, so just in general, there's some give and take there. So this one, we're gonna start the quality off with a 7. From there, age and generation. Now this one is a current generation at least, so SCX-10-2. Granted, the SCX-10 chassis is getting pretty dated now, but at least the SCX-10-2 axles that are underneath it are one of the best. So for that, we're going to give this one a 7 there as well. Then we get to finish, and that is, how everything's put together, the condition of the overall appearance and everything like that. And that is where this truck is definitely going to suffer. The last truck we got was pretty clean. This one is kind of a disaster as far as that goes. This one, I'm going to give about a 4. It's just a really, just in general, the finish of this vehicle is where we're going to be able to see the most improvement. The cage needs a little bit of work. We've got damaged or bent parts. In general, we've just got a lot of areas that need a lot of attention, and most all of it is going to be in that category. And then we have the resale category. Now this one being that it's a current gen and that it has custom work. Custom work is a big deal. You can't just easily go buy this setup. So obviously then there's less to be had. That is where this thing is also going to have a little bit of an advantage. However, since the work maybe isn't top quality work, we're not going to go too high, but we are going to give it a 7 again in that resale category. So that'll give us a decent starting point. Again, we've kind of touched on the areas which are going to need the most focus for sure. The last truck we only had 2 videos on. This one, just based on the amount of actual labor that this is going to need, we may see more than 2. So stay tuned for that. If you guys see obvious things on this truck you'd like to see done that, maybe we could get done with very low investment. We've got a little bit of money left after the last truck to play around with as far as helping throw a little bit of cash here. But remember, if you try and buy a new body for $50, well, you're not going to necessarily up the resale $50. You may only up it $25, unless this one was so haggard that it really just brought the whole retail price down. So that's kind of the balance back and forth. But give it some thought, see if you guys can come up with any ideas of what we should do to this truck to make it a little bit more unique and a little bit better on the resale ability. But that's going to do it for this episode of Flip That Truck, guys. I appreciate you guys watching. I think this one is going to be fun. I think we're going to have quite the transformation when we're done with it. Again, thanks for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoy these videos. Subscribe if you're not already. Hit the notification bell so you see the Flip That Trucks videos as soon as they get uploaded. Again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.